And please turn off your mobiles, which I acknowledge I didn't do last week. The only time I've had so many calls afterwards. Right, let me just tell you, because we've got a full lecture today, we've got a double header today. But let me first of all tell you about next week. You know, next week is a very special lecture. I know some people all think they're all special. Next week we've got two, you may know that this is the 70th anniversary this year of the Exodus calamity. And next lecture, next Thursday, we have two survivors from the Exodus ship who are going to come here. They were Holocaust survivors and they got on the Exodus and then they were returned back to Germany. They've got remarkable stories and I do hope you're going to come. It would help us so that we can know about numbers, because you can see we're pretty full. Those of you who think, not a commitment, who think they will be coming next week, could you just indicate? Okay, thank you. Right. Now, this morning we have, as I say, a double header, because Roy Aloni, who was talking about Beethoven's the Sixth Symphony, won't be here till 11 o'clock. So prior to that, we're very fortunate in that we've got with us Matan Danska. Matan is a young man of 25, a former commander of the IDF, and since then he's now the strategic advisor to the mayor of Efrat. He has spoken throughout the world virtually, America, Australia, he's going to England shortly, about Israel. The subject he's going to be talking about today is liberalism in the political agenda in Israel. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Matan Danska.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'm very glad to be here to depress you for a half an hour before you go to Beethoven and talk about serious matters. But Beethoven is very serious, so I hope I also get the opportunity to stay afterwards. I know that there's a question mark, and a lot of the people are sitting there, question mark in your head, why is a 24-year-old, not a 25, I know I look it, but a 24-year-old speaking before such a young crowd today in Herzliya. And I promise you that you will get an answer to that question. I hope I'm not, a little too excited about it, but I think you will. I think you'll have an answer to that question. A few words about who I am and why I'm here and why I've been speaking throughout the world. I have a personal column that gets published in the Jerusalem Post once every 2 weeks, in the Jerusalem Report rather, and also goes online on JPost. So I realized a few years ago, after a tragic event that happened to me and happens to many Israelis in their biographies, something that I'll speak about in the very short time that we have, I realized that my patriotic views, my national views, my Zionist views, have gone into a crisis. A crisis that yet many, many young Israelis are going through. It's a crisis of identity and serious questions that have started to be, have always been asked essentially, but my generation, the young generation of Israelis, is asking even deeper, why? What are we doing here? What's the cause? What's the real essential cause of what we're doing here in the state of Israel? What do we want to the future to come? And I realized that Zionism has always been a philosophy. And it took me time to understand that. It's always been arguments for years and years. You had Echad Ha'am, and you had Mendele Mocher Sfarim, and of course you had then the Ben Gurion, and you had the revisionists, you had Jabotinsky, you had so many think tankers, people who were thinking day after day what we want from our national movement. Because it really isn't just a political movement, what we did in Israel in the past 70 years, and what we did beforehand, and what many of the people sitting here contributed so much. It's also a philosophy. And I realized that our existence, our cultural existence, essentially will have to do with young Israelis, a new generation of Israelis, who will think, in a sense, rethink. Because, as the philosopher Descartes said, I think, therefore I exist. That is my philosophical opinion about what Zionism needs to be. And in my national perspective, politically, I always go with what Winston Churchill said, that without victory, there can be no existence. Those are two things that I have. One is a Zionism of thinking, a philosophy, and of course the political one that we're all a part of, securing the state of Israel. So today, very shortly, I want to pinpoint to you 3 challenges that are unique, I believe, to my generation of Israelis, to a newborn generation of Israelis who don't fear anymore, thank God, don't fear anymore the feeling of annihilation, the feeling of survival mode. Psychologically, we are a different generation. Therefore, creatively, we need to think of new ideas. 3 challenges that I think have a component, a formula, that in a sense can help solve them. One is what there's always been, a crisis of Zionism. Young Israelis have started to ask themselves, can I actually be progressive and be nationally oriented? That's the question being asked across campuses in the United States, of course South Africa. I've been to many of these campuses. People feel that they're stuck and caught between 2 very complex identities. How, in a postmodern world, some would say unfortunately, some would say fortunately, in a post-national world, how can we maintain this deep, deep national identity when we're all one global universe that we can talk to each other on Facebook? And does that actually go together with my progressive values? Whether we are progressive or not, the fact of the matter is, that's where the young generation is. That means feminism, that means gay rights, that means a separation of church and state or synagogue of state, that means many other things. So does that mean that I have to make the choice? Some young people would say yes. You're either a national Zionist, or you're either a liberal person, you know, sort of committed to liberal citizen and freedom values. Obviously, I think they can go together, but some people are making that assumption. The second thing is the demographic change. 10 years from now, we'll all be here. There'll be a poll that will come out. We'll read it all in the newspapers, whether it will be Jerusalem Post, Yediot Ahronot, Ma'ariv, or any other newspaper. Maybe there'll be a column in J-Post about it. The majority of children going into first grade in Israel will not be getting a classic Zionist education. That meaning both the rise of Israeli Arabs and ultra-Orthodox religious Jews will not be in the regular curriculum. Some of them will not be learning math and science, like in some of the schools today in the ultra-Orthodox. And then the other side, some of course, we can understand that given the identity complication of Israeli Arabs, will not be serving in the army, will not be getting an Israeli regular curriculum learning the history. That means essentially the Israeli public will change from a secular or modern religious majority into tribes. As been presented by President Rivlin in his famous tribe speech, we will become a tribal nation. That means rethinking. What do we do in terms of how do we maintain the Zionist identity of the state when the demography of it changes in its essence? Complicated issue. And the third one...
Please define, what do you understand with tribal state? What?
Tribal means that you will have a couple of sectors within the Israeli society that, in a sense, don't go through one consensus as we once said, as there used to be in Israel. In the declaration of the state, you had here a huge percentage, basically, of what you would call regular Zionists, whether they were religious or secular, mostly secular. 10 years from now, 50% of the state will not consider themselves as Zionist Israelis. That means that's a problem for the economy, that means that's a problem for the army, and essentially that means that you will have a small percentage, or at least not a majority, holding the entire country. But whether in the workforce, because we have the problem with ultra-Orthodox men and the Arab women, both for different issues that we have enormous work problems there. So we will become a fragmented tribal society, and that brings challenges to...
Excuse me, this
yes.
is what we need today in the Arab world.
I'm sorry.
The Arab world is tribal.
Well, we can get to that right away. The third issue, but I'll answer that. The third issue is the economic issue. If I would ask the majority of the crowd here, is Israel a free economy? A free economy, I wouldn't go as to, I'm not going to ask whether it's Reagan but let's say, is Israel a classic, liberal, free economy? Would the majority answer yes?
No.
Those who answer no, I agree with. Israel, in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of the complexity